I stepped out of the sleek black car onto the marble steps of the Crane estate, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and unease. Today was my first day as the personal assistant to Harrison Crane, one of the most powerful tycoons in the city, a man whose name alone commanded respect and whispered influence in boardrooms and beyond. The grandeur of the mansion was intimidating, the towering columns, the manicured gardens, and the polished glass doors that reflected the sky felt like stepping into a different world, a world ruled by unspoken codes I was only beginning to understand. As I crossed the threshold, the atmosphere changed instantly. It was as if the very air was charged with silent vigilance. The butler greeted me with a curt nod but no smile. The staff moved with a purposeful quietness, exchanging glances that seemed to carry warnings. I quickly realized this was no ordinary household, it was a fortress where every gesture, every word, was measured and weighed. Mr. Crane himself was a man of few words and rigid discipline. Before my arrival, I had read countless profiles painting him as a titan of industry, but meeting him in person was an entirely different experience. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his gray eyes sharp and calculating, his presence commanding without effort. He handed me a sleek tablet loaded with his private schedules and confidential documents, his voice clipped and clear. "You'll have access to everything you need, but remember, privacy is paramount. Nothing leaves this estate without my approval." His gaze lingered just long enough to impress the seriousness of his warning. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. This wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility that required discretion and unwavering loyalty. Yet beneath his stern exterior, there was an undercurrent of something else, an elusive tension I couldn't quite place. The days that followed revealed the rigid structure of the household. Every member of the staff adhered to unspoken rules, doors closed softly behind you, conversations were kept to a minimum, and eyes rarely met unless necessary. I learned quickly to navigate this delicate dance, aware that one misstep could unravel the fragile balance. Then there was Emily Crane, Harrison's daughter. Unlike her father's commanding presence, Emily was almost a shadow within the mansion, a quiet, reserved young woman who seemed to glide through the halls unnoticed. She avoided family gatherings, declined invitations to social events, and communicated in brief, measured sentences. There was a sadness about her, a reluctance that spoke volumes beneath her calm demeanor. One afternoon, as I was organizing the study, I noticed a small leather-bound book left carelessly on a mahogany desk. The cover was worn, the pages delicate. Curiosity prickled at me, but I hesitated. It was Emily's diary, left open as if inviting discovery yet warning against intrusion. The first few entries were innocuous enough, notes about daily routines and fleeting thoughts, but as I flipped through, I sensed something deeper lurking between the lines. The diary hinted at hidden tensions within the family, veiled references to fear and distrust. Emily wrote about moments when her father's sternness crossed into something darker, something unspoken but palpable. She described nights filled with hushed arguments behind closed doors, and the weight of secrets that seemed to suffocate the household. My heart ached for her, a young woman trapped beneath the shadow of a man whose empire extended far beyond business. Despite the warning bells ringing in my mind, I found myself drawn to the diary. It was as if Emily's words offered a glimpse into a world where vulnerability was hidden beneath layers of power and control. The mansion's polished surfaces concealed fractures that only someone on the inside could see. That evening, I sat in the quiet of my small office, the diary resting on my lap. The house was still except for the faint hum of the security system, and the soft footsteps of the night staff. I wondered how much of Emily's fear was born from reality, and how much from a daughter's perception of her father's rigid expectations. The line between protection and oppression blurred in my mind. Throughout the day, I had witnessed subtle shifts in the household's rhythm, locked doors that weren't usually locked, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room, and the pervasive feeling that certain topics were taboo. The staff's eyes held stories they would never tell, guarded by loyalty or fear. As much as I wanted to respect the boundaries set by Mr. Crane, the fragments of Emily's diary gnawed at me. It was a silent cry for help hidden beneath elegant handwriting and coded phrases. I found myself questioning the nature of power and control within walls so grand yet suffocating. Late into the night, I pondered the unspoken rules that governed this place. The mansion was more than a home. It was a stage where appearances were carefully curated, and the truth was a fragile thread woven beneath layers of wealth and influence. I realized that my role as assistant was not just about managing schedules or filtering calls, it was about navigating a complex web of secrets and loyalties. As I closed the diary carefully and placed it back on the desk, a sense of resolve settled within me. I would need to tread carefully, balancing my professional duties with the growing awareness of the unseen struggles that shaped this family. The mansion's walls held stories waiting to be uncovered, and I was now entwined in their silent unfolding. The next morning, I arrived early, armed with a renewed sense of purpose. The polished floors gleamed under the chandeliers, but the coldness beneath the surface remained. Harrison greeted me with his usual brisk nod, and Emily passed by quietly, her eyes briefly meeting mine with a flicker of something, relief, perhaps, or a tentative trust. The day stretched ahead, filled with calendars to manage, calls to screen, and an intricate dance of discretion. Yet amid the routine, I carried the weight of Emily's words, the unspoken tension that lingered like a shadow in every room. I knew this was only the beginning of a journey into the heart of a family where power, fear, and secrecy intertwined. And somewhere within the silence of the Crane estate, a story waited to be told. The diary had become an unspoken presence in my life, a secret tether pulling me deeper into the intricacies of the Crane household. I told myself it was curiosity, a need to understand the quiet girl who moved like a shadow through the mansion's halls. But as the days passed, the entries I read in secret revealed a darkness far beyond mere silence and reserve. Emily's handwriting grew more erratic with each page, her words suffused with fear and mistrust. She described moments when her father's gaze would harden, his temper flaring behind the polished mask of control. There were references to strange behaviors, late-night phone calls whispered in hushed tones, doors locked from the inside, and a growing sense that the family's pristine image was a fragile veneer over something far more troubling. One entry caught my breath. "He watches, always. Not just me but all of us. The house has ears, and walls have eyes. I don't know who to trust anymore." The words were simple, but the weight they carried was crushing. I felt a pang of guilt, reading someone's private fears, yet I couldn't look away. It was as if the diary held the only key to understanding the household's suffocating atmosphere. I wrestled with the ethical dilemma that gnawed at me. Was I betraying Emily's trust by reading her most personal thoughts? Or was I uncovering a truth that needed to be seen? The lines blurred between protector and intruder. Each entry added pieces to a puzzle I was not sure I wanted to solve. The mansion itself seemed to respond to my growing unease. Whispers echoed down long corridors, voices trailing off when I entered a room. Staff members exchanged wary glances, their loyalty to Mr. Crane evident but tinged with something unspoken, fear, perhaps, or resignation. The locked doors I had noticed before became more frequent, barriers not just of wood and metal but of secrecy. One afternoon, as I passed the library, I overheard a hushed argument between two servants. The words were clipped, urgent. "It's not safe to keep this quiet anymore," one whispered. "If Mr. Crane finds out, there'll be consequences." I froze, heart pounding, but the voices faded as quickly as they had appeared. That night, alone in my quarters, I turned back to the diary. Emily's entries had taken a darker turn, hinting at a secret that could unravel everything. "There's something in my father's past," she wrote. "A shadow that stretches over us all. If it comes to light, it could destroy the family." The gravity of her words settled over me like a storm cloud. I realized that the Crane family's reputation, carefully cultivated and fiercely protected, was built on fragile foundations. The possibility of exposure was terrifying, not just for Harrison Crane, but for everyone caught in his orbit. Despite my apprehension, I felt compelled to learn more. The diary was no longer just a window into Emily's world, it was a map to hidden dangers and buried truths. I began to notice patterns in the house, certain rooms off limits at odd hours, unexplained security measures, and a pervasive tension that thickened the air. My conscience battled with my growing determination. I wanted to respect the boundaries of privacy, yet the fear in Emily's words echoed in my mind. I knew silence could be complicity. The mansion, with all its grandeur, had become a cage, and Emily was trapped inside. One evening, while organizing paperwork in Mr. Crane's office, I stumbled upon a locked drawer. The key was nowhere in sight, but the lock wasn't complex. My fingers trembled as I managed to pry it open, revealing a bundle of documents tied with a faded ribbon. I glanced around nervously and pulled out a few papers. They were financial records, but irregularities jumped out, transactions that didn't align with the public face of the company. My heart raced as I realized these documents might hold the proof of the dark secret Emily feared. I stuffed the papers into my bag, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on my shoulders. If these were true, the consequences would be devastating. The following days were a blur of tension. I noticed Mr. Crane's presence looming more frequently, his sharp eyes missing nothing. The staff grew more guarded, and Emily's behavior shifted. Her glances toward me were fleeting but spoke volumes of unspoken trust. The diary had become a silent bridge between us, a shared burden we both carried. One afternoon, I heard the sound of hurried footsteps and hushed voices from the upper floor. I followed cautiously and witnessed a scene that tightened the knot in my stomach. Mr. Crane confronting Emily in the hallway, his voice low but fierce, her face pale and resolute. They spoke in clipped sentences, the kind of exchange that leaves no room for misunderstanding. When their eyes met mine for a brief moment, I saw the flicker of warning in Emily's gaze. That evening, as I sat alone with the diary once more, I struggled to reconcile the man I served with the father Emily feared. Harrison Crane's carefully constructed facade was cracking, revealing shadows I never imagined. The mansion's silence was no longer peaceful, it was a warning. I realized that my role had shifted. I was no longer just an assistant managing schedules and filtering calls, I was a keeper of secrets, a witness to a family on the brink of unraveling. The ethical boundaries I had clung to were dissolving in the face of a greater truth. As I closed the diary, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The Crane estate, with all its wealth and power, was a place where trust was a rare commodity and fear a constant companion. Emily's words haunted me, reminding me that beneath the polished surface lay a storm waiting to break. I knew I stood at a crossroads between silence and revelation, loyalty and justice. The diary was no longer just Emily's refuge, it was a call to action. And the deeper I delved, the more I realized that uncovering the truth could come at a cost none of us were prepared to pay. The moment I finally confronted Emily was one I had both dreaded and anticipated since the first time I read her diary. It was late evening, the mansion quiet except for the distant hum of the security system and the occasional creak of settling walls. I found her in the conservatory, seated beneath the glass ceiling, where moonlight filtered softly through the foliage. Her eyes, usually distant, locked onto mine with an intensity that stopped me in my tracks. "I know you've been reading the diary," she said quietly, the words neither accusing nor pleading, simply stated as fact. I swallowed hard, nodding. "I'm sorry, Emily. But I needed to understand. I needed to know what you're going through." She sighed, a fragile sound that seemed to carry years of burden. "The diary is the only place I can speak freely. It's the only way I've found to expose what's been hidden for so long." Her confession spilled out in whispers, a story too heavy for a young woman to bear alone. Harrison Crane was not just the stern patriarch I had glimpsed, he was a man whose empire was built on a foundation of lies and ruthless ambition. Emily revealed that her father had been involved in a web of illegal business dealings, bribery, cover-ups, and betrayals that had ruined lives and destroyed reputations. The diary was her silent rebellion, a record of the truth she feared to voice aloud. As she spoke, I felt the weight of her courage and the danger it invited. To stand against Harrison Crane was to challenge a titan, a man whose reach extended far beyond the walls of this mansion. Determined to find concrete evidence, I returned to Mr. Crane's office the next day. The locked drawer I had previously discovered now seemed like a gateway to truths long buried. With trembling hands, I sifted through files and documents, each one peeling back layers of deception. Among them were contracts with forged signatures, records of hush money payouts, and correspondence hinting at deliberate cover-ups. The realization hit me with crushing force: Emily's fears were not unfounded. Harrison Crane had built his empire not only on legitimate business acumen, but also on a shadowed past he desperately sought to conceal. My heart pounded as I heard footsteps approaching. Hastily, I stuffed the papers back into the drawer and closed it just as Harrison entered the room. His presence was immediate and overwhelming, a cold intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "What are you doing here?" His voice was calm but edged with steel. I forced myself to meet his gaze, careful not to betray the panic rising within me. "Just organizing some documents, sir." He narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced, but said nothing more. Instead, he turned and left, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. The encounter left me shaken. Harrison Crane's facade of control was intact for now, but beneath it, I sensed a storm brewing. The house felt heavier, the tension more palpable. I realized that the Tycoon's respectability was a carefully maintained mask, and the cracks were beginning to show. In the days that followed, I observed the subtle shift in the mansion's atmosphere. Mr. Crane's movements became more deliberate, his scrutiny more intense. He seemed to sense that something was amiss, though he did not yet know the full extent. Emily, meanwhile, grew more withdrawn, her fear mingling with a fragile hope that someone outside her silent world might stand with her. I found myself at a crossroads, torn between the duty to my employer, the need to protect Emily, and the growing conviction that the truth could no longer be hidden. The mansion, once a place of rigid order, was unraveling before my eyes. One evening, as I prepared to leave the study, I overheard a muffled conversation in the hallway. Peering through the cracked door, I saw Harrison speaking in low, urgent tones with one of his closest aides. The words I caught sent a shiver down my spine: "Contain the situation. No leaks. If this gets out, the entire company will collapse." The weight of those words settled heavily on me. The secrets I had uncovered were more dangerous than I had imagined, and the stakes were higher than I had allowed myself to believe. Despite the risk, I knew I could not turn away. Emily's courage had sparked something within me, a determination to stand against the tide of silence and deception. The evidence was there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. As I closed the office door behind me, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. The game had changed, and I was no longer a mere observer. I was a participant in a battle for truth, trust, and justice within the walls of the Crane estate. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril, but for the first time since arriving, I felt a clarity of purpose. The story hidden beneath the surface was beginning to unfold, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The weight of the evidence pressed heavily in my bag as I paced the length of my small office, mind racing with possibilities and consequences. I had made a decision, one that felt both terrifying and necessary. I would protect Emily, not just as her assistant, but as an ally willing to gather the proof needed to expose Harrison Crane's dark past safely. The truth could no longer be buried beneath silence and fear. Emily and I met in the quiet sanctuary of the conservatory, where the moonlight softened the shadows and gave her a fragile aura of strength. I laid out the documents before her, watching as her eyes scanned the incriminating papers, contracts, financial statements, and correspondence that confirmed everything she had feared. The evidence was undeniable. "This is it," I said softly. "This is what will protect you. We can use this to demand accountability." She nodded, her usual reserve replaced by something resolute. "I've lived in his shadow for too long. It's time he faced the consequences." Together, we began to plan. Emily knew the risks of confronting her father directly, but she was ready. The mansion was no longer a prison, but the setting for a reckoning long overdue. We agreed to proceed carefully, to gather support quietly and ensure that when the moment came, the truth would be undeniable. The day Emily confronted Harrison was charged with tension. I watched from a distance as the daughter who had once seemed so fragile stood before her father with unwavering courage. Their voices were low but firm, words exchanged that echoed through the marble halls like thunder. Harrison's initial reaction was anger, his face hardening as he denied the accusations, dismissing them as fabrications. But Emily remained steadfast, presenting the evidence with a calm that belied her years. The confrontation was a battle of wills, a clash between the old guard's desire to maintain control, and a new generation demanding transparency. I saw the first cracks in Harrison's armor as he realized the depth of the challenge before him. The household atmosphere shifted palpably, the staff who had once moved with silent obedience now looked uncertain, whispers rippling through the corridors like a rising tide. In the days that followed, the family's facade began to unravel. The mansion, once a symbol of unyielding power, became a place where truth and justice edged forward, slowly breaking through years of carefully constructed deception. Emily found her voice growing stronger, supported not only by the evidence, but by the quiet solidarity of those around her. I stood by her side, no longer just an assistant, but a protector of her story, and a witness to her courage. Harrison, faced with mounting pressure, oscillated between denial and reluctant acknowledgement. The man who had seemed untouchable was now forced to confront the consequences of his actions, both within his family and beyond. The household was transformed, the rigid rules bending under the weight of truth. The mansion's silence was replaced by conversations once forbidden, by questions that demanded answers. It was a painful process, but one necessary for healing. I felt the shift deeply in my own role. What had begun as a job had become a mission to support a young woman reclaiming her life from the shadows. The trust Emily placed in me was both humbling and empowering. As the days turned into weeks, the Crane estate no longer felt like a fortress of secrets. Instead, it became a place where courage had begun to dismantle walls, where justice was no longer an abstract ideal, but a living force shaping the future. Through it all, I realized that standing up against corruption required more than evidence, it demanded resilience, solidarity, and the willingness to face uncertainty head-on. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, the air within the mansion carried a fragile hope. A hope born from the courage of one young woman, and the determination of those who refused to let silence prevail. The scandal broke like a thunderclap, reverberating through the city's financial districts and media outlets with relentless force. Harrison Crane, once an untouchable figure in the world of industry, was forced to step down from his position amidst a wave of public outrage and legal scrutiny. The carefully spun image of the Crane empire unraveled in real time, exposing the dark underbelly we had fought so hard to bring to light. As the dust settled, Emily and I found ourselves bound by a connection forged through shared hardship and unwavering trust. The walls that had kept her isolated for so long began to come down, replaced by a newfound openness that extended beyond the mansion's gates. Our conversations, once limited to hushed whispers and secret glances, grew into a partnership grounded in strength and hope. I often found myself reflecting on the cost of secrecy, the heavy toll it exacted on those caught beneath its weight. Yet, through the pain and betrayal, there was also a profound realization: truth held the power to liberate and heal. Emily's courage had ignited a spark that could not be extinguished, and I was honored to have stood beside her. The Crane family's legacy was irrevocably changed. What had once been a symbol of untouchable power was now a cautionary tale of arrogance and concealment. But within that transformation lay the possibility of redemption, of rebuilding on a foundation of honesty and accountability. In the quiet moments, I watched Emily reclaim her life, not as the shadowed daughter of a fallen tycoon, but as a young woman determined to define her own path. The mansion, once a prison of silence, echoed instead with conversations about renewal and reconciliation. Our journey had been fraught with uncertainty and risk, but it had revealed something essential about the human spirit. That standing up against corruption and fear was not just an act of defiance, but an affirmation of integrity and courage. As I moved through the halls of the estate, now brightened by the morning sun and softened by the laughter of those who dared to hope, I felt a quiet pride. We had faced the darkness together, and in doing so, had opened the door to a future where truth could finally flourish. The story of the Crane family was far from over, but it had begun a new chapter, one where honesty, trust, and resilience would shape the legacy to come. And in that chapter, I was determined to play my part, standing firm in the belief that courage and integrity are the true measures of strength. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.